Well, West Africa's regional body, WAFU, is the largest with 16 members who form the CAF West Africa Zones A and B. They too haven't been consistent in organizing tournaments across the region. The WAFU Nations Cup has been held 4 times since 2002. The competition was last held in 2013 and makes a return this year, with Ghana as hosts and all 16 teams expected to compete.
This tournament came about primarily as a function of TV money and not because the federations decided to suddenly get efficient. And one worries when these things are dictated by TV rather than policy. And so I look at how, again, it's going to perhaps replicate a sort of a second CHAN in the West African sub-region. Again, it affects the domestic football calendar. The Ghanaian Football League is going on a 1-month break simply to accommodate this, and I'm sure it's going to be replicated across other countries. So the already poor calendar structure that exists in West African football federations is not going to improve by this tournament coming into being. So of course it's going to do good for West African football in terms of giving it a better profile, but in terms of real returns, I don't think we're going to see too much.
Right now, for more on this, I'm now joined in studio by sports consultant Arnold Kanyangonda. Arnold, thank you for joining us. I'll begin by asking you, why does it seem that the competition like COSAFA seems to be flourishing at a time like this, while CECAFA and WAFU seem to be having more serious struggles?
I think it comes down to 2 things, which are really the lifeblood of football and sports these days: money and television. COSAFA, of course, stands for Confederation of Southern African Football Associations, and the biggest member there is, of course, South Africa, which is Africa's biggest economy, the biggest TV stations, especially in sports in Africa, based there. And so, being South Africa's confederation and South Africa looking to develop their teams, as you've seen Stuart Baxter say there, that they use a lot of the age teams or their domestic players for those competitions, it's possible for them to do it. The problems with East Africa and West Africa, as contrasted with Southern Africa, is we've not seen any leadership problems, and that's the third thing. We've not seen leadership problems in South African football. They went through peaceful transition, peaceful elections. The head of COSAFA now is a gentleman called Dr. Philip Chiangwa, the head of Zimbabwean football, and they've stabilized the grouping. They're having regular competitions, both in terms of age groups and in terms of the senior teams, and they've got the money, they've got the finances for this. Now, contrast that with CECAFA. There have been leadership wrangles in CECAFA for a while now. Time, yes. And then if you look at also the member associations of CECAFA, it's such that they are not exactly well constituted. There is, to be quite frank, dissension among CECAFA ranks. There are those who feel the current Secretary General should leave, he served his purpose. There are some who feel he should stay. And because CECAFA was largely focused on the power of the Secretary General, Nicholas Musonye, with him being isolated, a lot has not been able to go on. And part of the reason the competitions have not been taking place is because in a sense, an effort to hamstring him. So it comes down to leadership struggles. And then we are talking about, again, money and again, TV. You realize that Africa's biggest sports broadcaster, SuperSport, has essentially left the East African market. They have also pulled out of 2 of Africa's biggest football nations, Nigeria and Ghana, though the Nigeria situation is going backwards. They're going back on that. And so if you don't have TV to broadcast your games, you cannot attract the sponsors, you can't get the money, the tournament does not have any value for the teams. And so between the lack of leadership, lack of television partners, lack of sponsors, and I have to admit lack of government goodwill across the board, there's a reason why CECAFA, which, as you've pointed out, is Africa's oldest tournament. CECAFA goes back to 1926. It's older than the World Cup.
Indeed.
There's a reason why that now is not taking place, because of the lack of organization, leadership, finances, and television support. Okay,
and possibly a contentious question. Is African football difficult to sell, and why is it so?
Again, the things I've pointed out, you're talking about lack of leadership, lack of finances, lack of TV, and lack of just good management. That makes it difficult to sell. Let's take a look at Cameroon, for example. Cameroon used to be Africa's blue ribbon team.
Indeed.
People thought about Africa, they thought about Cameroon.
The Indomitable Lions.
The Indomitable Lions, exactly. Their story from 1990, beating Diego Maradona and Argentina, going to within 8 minutes of qualifying for the semi-finals, taking England's best team that we've ever seen to the very end. And then I'll contrast that with their situation in 2014 at the World Cup. Players literally getting into fisticuffs on the pitch. And then at the currently ongoing Confederations Cup, FIFA had to step in to make sure that they went in. Now, if you are, and then you can talk about Ghana as well as another example. at the 2014 World Cup, money had to be airlifted, physical funds on a plane had to fly from Ghana to Brazil. And then currently there's talk that their coach has not been paid. Before that, there was an assistant coach for the national team that had a difficult time. He had to stay in Ghana for 60 days after his contract ended because he'd not been paid, a gentleman from Spain. Now, if you're a European coach, if you're a European broadcaster, if you're a European stakeholder, or just somebody interested in investing in Africa, you know, you look at that, and then you look at areas where ease of doing football business is much better. Like you look at Asia, you can even look at Oceania. We saw Vanuatu at the Under-20 World Cup the other day. You'd think, do I take this money to Ghana, or do I take this money to Vanuatu, or to Vietnam, or to somewhere in the Caribbean where you know that at least things like management and leadership, you know, the fan interest, the support of government are all there.
And even infrastructure. Now, maybe there is a train of thought, an argument that maybe CAF's calendar is already really packed for both clubs and country at CHAN level, AFCON qualifiers. Is there enough space now for more regional competitions?
There's always been. That space has always been there. Let's take the example of the East African competition, CAF. It's always taken place in December, the Senior Challenge Cup, the oldest competition we're talking about, the one formerly known as the Gossage Cup. Traditionally, from the 1920s, it's always taken place in December, and that's a time when none of the leagues is ongoing, and there's no international competition ongoing. And especially if a team from CECAFA is not going to the Nations Cup, then that's a chance for them to play international competition. If a team is going to the Nations Cup or to CHAN, then that's a chance for them to prepare. These competitions have their place. Remember, unless these competitions are enforced, most African teams do not, or most African associations don't just have the same level of bilateral relations that other countries have, whereby they'll organize friendlies just like that. It's changing now, but the African teams, especially the smaller ones that don't get to go to CHAN, or don't get to go to AFCON, or don't get to go to the World Cup, they need this to keep international, to essentially get international play, like we saw with the example of Somalia.